On March 26th, at a precise moment that will not repeat for another year, Mercury passes directly through the heart of the Sun. Not near it, not beside it, through it. This alignment is called a Cazimi, an Arabic word meaning in the heart, and it carries a quality of clarity that is almost impossible to describe until you have felt it. Tonight and tomorrow, something in the noise inside your mind is going to go quiet. Not because things have resolved, but because something underneath the noise is finally speaking loudly enough to be heard. You have been moving through the last several weeks carrying something you cannot quite name, not grief exactly, not anxiety exactly, something older and quieter than either of those, a weight that does not announce itself with drama, but that you feel most clearly in the in-between moments, driving somewhere familiar, standing in a room you have stood in 1,000 times, waking before the alarm and lying still in the dark, aware that something is different without being able to say what. The sleep has not been right, not insomnia necessarily, not the restless night of someone with a racing mind, but a different quality of sleep, shallower, full of dreams that feel dense with meaning you cannot hold once you open your eyes. You wake carrying a residue, a mood that arrived while you were not watching, and you move through the day wearing it without knowing where you picked it up. Your thinking has been circling. You have noticed it. The same question returning in different clothes, the same territory being crossed and recrossed without arriving anywhere new. You are not confused exactly. You know the terrain. You know what the question is beneath the question, but the answer, the real answer, the one that would actually change something, has felt just outside your reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue that refuses to come, like a face you recognize but cannot place. And the frustration of that is a specific kind of frustration, the frustration of someone who knows they know something and simply cannot access it yet. The things that used to feel settled have felt less settled. Decisions you thought you had made are reopening. Certainties that you relied on, not necessarily big dramatic certainties, but the small functional ones, the ones you use to get through a day without existential reckoning, those have started to feel less solid. And you have not always been sure whether that is a problem or a sign of something, whether the ground shifting underneath you is loss or preparation. That uncertainty lives in your chest, not painfully, but constantly. Something is coming clear tonight, and you have already been feeling it building. That is why you are here. Welcome. If you are watching this on the 26th or the 27th, there are thousands of people receiving this at almost exactly the same moment, in different rooms, in different countries, in different points in their lives, but all of them carrying some version of what you just heard named. That is not a small thing. There is something real about this many people sitting still at the same time, listening inward in the window of the same planetary moment. You are not alone in this particular kind of searching. If this is landing for you, if even one thing in those first words made you feel found, leave a comment that says, "I am ready to hear clearly." Not because you have everything figured out, not because the noise has already stopped, but because you are here, and being here is already the beginning of something. Subscribe if you have not yet. There is more of this work, and it goes deeper each time. If someone in your life is circling the same questions you are, send them this. Now let us go all the way in. Something in the weeks before a Mercury Cazimi does something very specific to the mind. It does not break down thought, it overwhelms it. The volume of inner noise rises without any clear external cause. More thoughts, more loops, more of the kind of mental activity that feels productive but produces nothing. And the reason for that is not dysfunction, it is preparation. The mind, sensing an incoming moment of clarity, begins searching harder than usual for what it needs to resolve. It knows something is arriving. It is restless in the way a person is restless on the night before something important. Not anxiously, not fearfully, but with a low-level alertness that does not know where to direct itself. You have been in that state. You have felt it as pressure without a source, as a fullness inside your skull that does not come with a headache, but with a kind of thickness, as if thoughts are moving through something denser than usual. And in the body, this has registered as a specific kind of fatigue, not the fatigue of overexertion, Not the fatigue of poor sleep, though that has contributed. A deeper fatigue. The fatigue of sustained internal effort. Of a mind that has been working very hard below the surface of what you are consciously aware of. Processing, sorting, preparing something for you. This is worth sitting with because it changes the way you feel about the last few weeks. The mental loops were not failure. The inability to land on answers was not confusion. The circling was the mind doing exactly what it needed to do. Gathering, reviewing, preparing the conditions for a moment of genuine clarity. You were not stuck. You were in the preparation stage of a process that is now arriving at its turn. The physical experience of this transit is subtle and specific. In the chest, there is often a quality of not tightening exactly, but gathering. As if something that has been dispersed is beginning to collect itself. In the throat, some people notice that speaking feels slightly different. Not difficult, not constricted, but more deliberate. As if the words available to them carry weight in a way they did not recently. In the hands, some people experience a low, restless energy. The urge to write, to touch things, to make contact with surfaces. The body is already responding to what is moving through the mind, even before the mind can articulate what that is. Your relationships in the last 2 to 3 weeks have had a quality of slight friction, nothing dramatic in most cases. Not fights, not ruptures, but small moments of misalignment. Conversations that felt like two people talking slightly past each other. Words that came out not quite wrong, but not quite right. Exchanges that left you with a mild residue of incompletion. You may have noticed yourself more careful than usual with language, choosing words more deliberately, second-guessing how you phrased something after the fact, replaying conversations and wondering whether you said what you actually meant. This is Mercury at work, and it is not malfunction. It is heightened precision operating in a window that was not yet ready for it. That window is now open. There is something that happens to your relationship with time in the weeks before a transit like this. The ordinary sense of days having a clear rhythm, of mornings feeling like beginnings and evenings feeling like ends, of weeks having a forward movement, begins to feel slightly off. Not wrong, not alarming, but off. Like a clock that is keeping perfect time, but whose sound has changed in a subtle way that you cannot stop noticing once you have noticed it. The hours feel both longer and less substantial. A morning that should feel new carries the heaviness of something unfinished. An evening that should feel like rest arrives already occupied by a low-level anticipation you cannot name. You are living inside time that is preparing for something, and the preparation has its own texture, dense and slightly pressured, thick with a sense of imminence that does not attach to any specific event you can point to. This quality of time is real. It is not you being dramatic. It is not a symptom of anything being wrong with you. It is the interior experience of a very active window, one in which the unconscious is doing enormous work that the conscious mind cannot fully track, and the residue of that work is the odd quality of the days, the slightly unreal quality of familiar things, the sense that you are both fully present in your ordinary life and also somewhere else entirely, watching from a slight distance, taking stock of something you have not yet named. There is a quality of longing that has been present in the background of these weeks, not for a person necessarily, not for a thing, for a kind of understanding, for a conversation you cannot quite have because you do not yet have the words for it, for a version of yourself that you can sense but not yet locate, for clarity, and you have known for a while that the clarity you are reaching for is not minor. It is not the clarification of a small confusion. It is something more fundamental, something about the direction of your life, something about what matters and what has been consuming your energy without deserving to, something about who you are when no one needs anything from you. That longing has been quiet but constant, and tonight it is getting closer to something it can recognize as an answer. Your sleep has had a specific quality in these weeks, not simply disrupted, inhabited. Dreams with a density that is different from the usual processing kind. You wake from them unable to hold the images but carrying the atmosphere. A residue, something emotional that does not attach to a memory you can name. And in the first minutes of consciousness, before the day's logistics begin to fill the available space, there is sometimes a quality of almost knowing, a sense that something was right there, fully formed, just before you surfaced, and then it is gone, and you move through the morning carrying its ghost. This is the mind doing something important under the surface. The dreams in the window before a Cazimi are not random. They are the less censored content, the material that the waking mind has been sorting and cataloging, surfacing in the dreaming mind in forms that bypass the usual filters. You will not always be able to retrieve the specific images, but if you pay attention to the feeling tone of the mornings, the particular emotional quality that arrives before you have given your mind anything external to process, you will find that it has been consistent, the same underlying mood, the same unnamed quality. That consistency is information. It is the signal beneath the noise, pointing towards something that is ready to become conscious. The word Cazimi comes from the Arabic Cazmimi, a term used by medieval astrologers to describe a planet so close to the sun that it sits within its very heart rather than merely in its light. A planet that is conjunct the sun is in its presence. A planet that is Cazimi is in its essence. The difference matters. In the heart of the sun, Mercury does not simply receive light, it is fused with it. And that fusion produces something in the human mind that is genuinely rare, a moment of unmediated knowing, a moment when the lens through which you see your own life clears, and what you see is not analyzed or constructed or defended. It is simply there, true in the way that only things that were always true can be. Mercury governs the mind's relationship with language, with pattern, with the movement of information between one place and another, between thought and speech, between perception and understanding, between what you sense and what you can articulate. When Mercury is Cazimi, it is not functioning at normal capacity. It is functioning at a kind of elevated pitch, pressed against the core of solar consciousness, stripped of everything peripheral, left with only what is essential. And what is essential in the domain of Mercury is truth, not complex truth, not truth that requires lengthy analysis or careful construction, the simple truth, the truth that was always there, underneath everything you have been thinking about it. This particular Cazimi happens in Aries, and that placement is significant. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, the sign of initiation, of direct action, of the self that exists before it has learned to modify itself for the world. When Mercury operates in Aries, it moves fast and straight. It does not circle. It does not qualify. It does not wait for the most diplomatic phrasing. In Aries, Mercury says what it sees, and in the heart of the sun in Aries, Mercury will show you something about yourself with a directness that you may not have been expecting. Think of the image of a lens, not a magnifying glass. That suggests distortion. Think instead of a perfectly clean optical lens, ground to exact specification, aligned precisely with its target. Most of the time, the mind functions with a lens that is slightly clouded by history, by fear, by the habitual ways we have learned to see ourselves. The cloudiness is not failure. It is the normal residue of a life lived. But in the window of a Cazimi, particularly a Cazimi in Aries, the lens clears, not completely, not permanently, but enough. Enough that you can see something you have been looking at for a very long time and not quite been able to make out. Enough that the thing you have been circling resolves briefly into focus. There is a particular feature of this Cazimi that deepens its significance. Mercury has been gathering speed in Aries for the preceding weeks, the same weeks in which your mental noise increased, in which the loops became more frequent, in which the sense of something building became harder to dismiss. The speed of Mercury in Aries in this window is not incidental. It mirrors the quality of mind most of you have been experiencing, fast, pressured, full of movement, without a rival. The Cazimi does not slow Mercury down. It focuses it. All of that accumulated speed, all of that gathering motion, passes through the heart of the sun and emerges as something it has not been in weeks. Aimed. What this transit is asking of you is not comfortable. It is asking for honesty that does not wait for perfect timing. It is asking you to look at the thing you have been circling and to let yourself actually see it, not to analyze it, not to process it, not to contextualize it, but simply to see it. Aries clarity is not gentle, but it is clean. and clean even when it is sharp, is ultimately a kindness. The lens is aligned. The question it is pointed at is you, and what it is asking, specifically precisely with the directness that only Aries in the heart of the sun can manage, is this: what do you already know that you have not yet let yourself fully look at? Begin with what is cracking open, because something is, and before we name what is coming through the crack, it is worth sitting for a moment with the feeling of the crack itself. You know this feeling. You have been in it before, at other points in your life, this sensation of something that felt solid beginning to give way. And you may have a complicated relationship with that sensation. For a person who has spent decades building a functional life, building competence, building self-knowledge, building the structures that allow everything to keep moving, the feeling of something giving way is not automatically welcome. It carries history. It carries the memory of other times things gave way, not all of which resolved gently. So before anything else, this is not the same as those times. What is cracking open right now is not structure that you need. It is a layer of thought, a way of seeing a particular situation, a particular aspect of yourself, a particular story you have been carrying that has outlasted its usefulness. The crack is the crack of something that has become rigid beyond its serving you point. And rigid things, when they finally give, make noise and send shards. That is not damage, that is completion. The specific thing cracking open for most people in this window is a story about what they can expect of themselves. Not a dramatic story, not a story about failure or inadequacy, something more subtle and more pervasive than that. A story about what is realistic, about what is too late for, about what is appropriate to want at this point in life. These are the stories that accumulate almost without noticing, the gradual narrowing of what a person permits themselves to desire, the slow reclassification of possibilities from possible to probably not for me anymore. The Cazimi in Aries is aimed directly at that narrowing, because Aries does not accept artificial limitation. Aries does not recognize too late as a real concept. Aries sees the narrowing as a problem of lens, not a problem of reality. And in the heart of the sun, it is going to show you at least one place where the wall you built was built out of protection, not out of truth. You built it for good reasons. The protection was genuine and, in the moment you built it, necessary. A person in their 30s or 40s who has experienced real loss of a relationship, of a version of the future they had planned on, of someone they loved, of a version of themselves they expected to grow into, builds walls, not out of cowardice, out of intelligence. The wall said, "I cannot take that kind of wound again." And the wall was right in the moment it was built. But the Cazimi is showing you that the moment has changed, that the old weather the wall was built for has moved on. And the wall is still standing, blocking something that no longer needs to be blocked, costing you energy that you no longer need to spend maintaining it. That is what is cracking, not your foundation, not your competence, not your earned wisdom. The wall that outlasted its purpose, let it crack. It has been working very hard for a very long time. It has earned its rest. What is coming up from beneath the surface is old. That is important to understand. The recognition you are approaching is not new information. It is information that has been present in you for a very long time, submerged beneath the management and maintenance of your daily life. The ordinary business of days, the responsibilities, the roles, the social contracts, the survival logistics, creates enormous pressure on what lives underneath, not because you chose to suppress it, but because there is simply not always room, in a life that has weight and obligation, for everything that lives inside it. Some things go quiet because they have to. They go quiet and they wait. What is surfacing now may be a version of yourself that was set aside at a specific juncture, a particular point in your 30s or 40s when a choice was made, a practical choice, a necessary choice, the right choice for that moment. And something that was true about you went underground to make room for it. That version of you did not disappear. It went quiet. It waited. And in the light of this Cazimi, in the directness of Aries, it is becoming audible again. It may come as longing, a low, persistent pull towards something that you cannot fully justify and cannot fully ignore. Not a crisis, but not minor either. A quiet insistence from something inside you that still knows what it wanted, still knows with a clarity that predates all the reasoning that came later. It may come as a memory of yourself doing something that felt entirely natural, a way of moving through the world that you have not inhabited in years, that you may have told yourself you have outgrown, that turns out to be less about age and more about permission. Less about whether it is still possible, more about whether you still believe you are allowed, or it may come as grief, old grief, the specific flavor of grief that comes not from loss, but from postponement, from things put off so many times that they began to feel like they were never going to happen. That grief is not self-pity, it is honesty. It is the part of you that kept the account, that did not let go of what was true, that has been waiting for a moment when you were ready to look at it directly. And looking at it directly is what the Cazimi asks. Not to do anything immediately, not to make a dramatic change before you have finished processing what is surfacing, but to look, with the lens clean, with the willingness to let what is true be true without immediately needing to manage it. Now look at the pattern, not this moment, the whole arc, the shape that has recurred throughout your life in different forms, but always with the same underlying structure. Mercury Cazimi in Aries, especially in the late degrees of Aries with the solar energy at full strength, tends to illuminate a very specific kind of long pattern, the pattern of self-interruption. The moment, in different periods of your life, in different contexts about different things, when you were moving towards something true and you stopped, not because someone stopped you, because you stopped yourself. Look back at the clearest instances, not to shame them, not to audit your life and mark the failures, to see the shape. There was a moment in your earlier life when a direction was becoming clear, a calling, a need, a knowing about what you were made for, and something arose and you turned away from it. Then later, in a different form, the same movement happened again, moving toward, then stopping. The contexts changed. The content of what you were moving toward changed, but the shape was the same. And the moment of stopping, this is the specific thing that Cazimi is asking you to look at. The moment of stopping almost always came not at the point of actual obstacle, but at the point of anticipated obstacle. The obstacle had not arrived. You were already imagining it. And in the imagining, you interrupted yourself as if the imagined obstacle were real. This is not a criticism of your intelligence. The anticipation reflex is one of the most sophisticated and useful things the human mind can do. Modeling future danger before it arrives is how you have navigated your life safely. It has protected you in genuine ways from genuine harm. But that reflex, so useful, so finely calibrated over decades, has a shadow. The shadow is that it fires with equal intensity regardless of whether the danger is real or imagined. It does not distinguish between the obstacle that is genuinely present and the one you are projecting from the pattern of past experience. It stops you with the same authority in both cases. And so the pattern is this. You have sometimes been stopped by futures that never arrived, by walls that dissolved the moment you actually reached them, had you continued, by obstacles that were in reality the size of your history with obstacles rather than the size of themselves. The Cazimi in Aries is the moment in which this becomes visible, clearly, undeniably, with the kind of directness that makes it impossible to continue not seeing it. You are between two shores, right now. In these days, in this window, you are not fully who you were. The version of yourself organized around that pattern, shaped by those walls. And you are not yet fully who you are becoming, which is the version who has looked at the pattern clearly enough that it can no longer operate invisibly. Being between is its own specific experience. It does not feel like progress. It feels like suspension. Like being mid-sentence without the next word available. Like standing in a doorway that has not decided whether it leads inside or outside. For someone in their 50s, this in-between has a specific gravity that it does not have at 25. Because at 25, being between is an adventure, the open road, the uncertainty that still feels like possibility, the time that still feels infinite. By your 50s, the arithmetic of time is not abstract. You know how many years you have spent in various states of waiting. You know the cost of postponement, not philosophically but from direct experience, and so being in between at this age carries weight that it did not carry before. The other shore is not hypothetical, it is the actual future of your actual life, and you know what it means to not reach it. The particular loneliness of this in-between deserves its own naming, because it is a kind that does not get named often enough. It is not the loneliness of being without people. You may be surrounded by people. It is the loneliness of being in a part of your own experience that you cannot share easily, because the experience resists summary, and the people around you are living inside their own time, not yours. It is the loneliness of occupying a moment in your interior life that has no adequate external equivalent. The calendar says Tuesday. Your body says something is changing. The gap between those two realities, between the ordinary progress of the outer world and the non-ordinary quality of what is happening inside you, is the specific location of this loneliness. You are not lost, but you are, for now, alone in knowing exactly where you are. And there is a strange kind of courage required to stay with that, to not immediately reach for distraction or resolution, to let the in-between be what it is, uncomfortable, unresolved, full of questions that do not yet have answers, without demanding that it speed up or make itself legible before it is ready. That courage is exactly what the Cazimi and Aries is pointing to. Not the courage of dramatic action, the courage of honest stillness, of staying present in your own experience long enough for what is true to become visible. I am not going to tell you it will resolve quickly or cleanly or without difficulty. What I will tell you is that this particular in-between is different from the ones you have crossed before. The previous transitions were driven by external change, circumstances shifting, chapters ending, the external world reorganizing itself and forcing you to reorganize alongside it. This one is driven by internal change, by genuine seeing, by clarity that arises not because something outside you changed, but because something inside you has cleared. And internal clarity of this quality, not the clarity of reaching a decision or solving a problem, but the clarity of actually seeing what has been there all along, has a different kind of staying power. It does not depend on circumstances remaining favorable. It does not evaporate when the next difficulty arrives. It is part of you now, in a way that the external change clarity is not. It belongs to you differently. Something is beginning to stabilize. Underneath the dissolution, underneath the in-between, something is finding its footing. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself with certainty or resolution, but in the way that real things begin, as a quality rather than a conclusion, as a different texture to the morning, as a slightly different relationship between you and the questions that have been living in you. You may notice that a decision which last month felt impossible, not the largest one perhaps, but one of the foundational ones, is beginning to feel possible. Not because the circumstances have resolved, because you have begun to see it through a cleaner lens. And through that cleaner lens, the decision looks different, less dangerous, more obvious even. The thing that made it feel impossible was not the decision itself. It was the story that surrounded it, the accumulated interpretation, the anticipatory obstacle, the imagined consequences. With the lens clean, what remains is the decision itself. And the decision itself, stripped of the story, is often far simpler than what you have been carrying. A relationship you have been seeing through a particular blur, the blur of wishful thinking, or the blur of habitual interpretation, or the blur of what you needed it to be in order to feel safe, is beginning to clarify. You are not losing the relationship. You are seeing it more honestly. And honest sight, even when it shows you something you did not want to see, is ultimately less effortful than sustaining a blur. The sustained effort of almost seeing is enormous. It costs you constantly. You are beginning to be able to put that effort down. What replaces it is not always comfort, but it is solid in a way that almost seeing never was. A direction, not a destination, not a plan, not a life redesigned, but a direction is becoming perceptible. The compass needle that has been spinning through the weeks of Mercury's noisy approach to the Sun is beginning slowly to orient, not to a specific address, to a specific quality, to a way of being in the days ahead that feels less like obligation and more like expression, less like the performance of a role and more like the inhabiting of something true. You know this quality. You have touched it before, in moments that felt too good to be sustainable, too aligned to trust, too close to what you actually wanted to believe they were available to you permanently. What the Cazimi in Aries is asking you to consider is whether the unsustainability was ever real, or whether it was the story, whether the permission was the actual variable all along. The steadiness that is beginning to form in you is not the steadiness of certainty. That is important. The old steadiness, the one you built in your younger years out of decisions made and paths chosen and identities claimed, that steadiness had certainty as its foundation. It was solid because you knew what you were doing and why, or at least you were committed enough to act as if you did. What is forming now is a different kind of steadiness entirely. It is the steadiness of someone who has looked at what is true, including the complicated parts, including the things they would rather not have had to see, and has not looked away. It is the steadiness that comes not from having answers, but from having been honest, from having allowed what is real to be real without flinching. That is a different kind of ground to stand on. It does not give you a map, but it gives you footing that does not depend on the map being right. The lens is clean. Look through it and let what you see be true, and the direction it has found, however faint it is, however much it still needs time and tending, is more reliable than any direction that came from the old certainty, because this one was found through honest sight. That counts for something. It counts for a great deal. The first practice this transit calls for is what I will name returning to your own testimony. Not journaling as documentation, not journaling as emotional processing. Something more precise than either. Sit down in the next 48 hours, tonight if you can, tomorrow at the latest while the alignment is still in its peak window, with a single question written at the top of a blank page. The question is this: what do I already know that I have not yet been willing to act on? And then write. Not toward an answer, just write. Follow the mind wherever it goes without editing, without redirecting, without censoring the thoughts that feel too raw or too ambitious or too late or too strange. The Cazimi in Aries creates a specific window in which the mind has access to what it actually knows, rather than what it has decided it is allowed to know. That window is brief. It closes within 24 to 36 hours of the exact alignment. Use it. The resistance that will arise is the voice that says this is self-indulgent, that you already know this, that you have done this before and nothing changed. That voice is not wisdom. It is the pattern, the very pattern the Cazimi is asking you to see. Notice it. Write anyway. What comes out in this window will not be the usual material. It will be the unedited testimony from the part of you that has been waiting for the lens to clear. Treat it as important. It is. Read it back to yourself afterward, not as a problem to solve but as a statement to hear. What has this part of you been trying to say? What has it needed you to acknowledge? Let the acknowledgement happen, even on paper, even in private. Acknowledgement does not require immediate action, but it changes something. It changes the relationship between you and what you know. There is also a fourth dimension to this practice that is worth naming. After you have written, after you have read back what came out, sit for 1 minute in silence with what you have read. Not to analyze it, not to plan around it, simply to let it exist in the room with you. This is the part that feels unnecessary, the part the mind will want to skip over in favor of doing something useful with what emerged. Resist that impulse. The 1 minute of silence after the testimony is the moment in which the testimony moves from paper to person, from words to knowing. It is brief and it is not dramatic, and it is the part that actually completes the practice. The second practice is what I will call speaking one true sentence, not a paragraph, not a conversation. One sentence, spoken aloud, alone, to no one but yourself, that is completely accurate about your current situation, your current desire, your current location in your own life, something you know to be true that you have not yet put into spoken words. This matters because Mercury Cazimi in Aries operates specifically in the domain of voiced truth. The voice externalizes what the mind holds internally, and the act of speaking changes the relationship between you and what you know in a way that thinking about it cannot replicate. It makes it real in a different register. It makes it harder to unknow. It closes a gap between your internal experience and the world outside your mind that has been open in some cases for years. The resistance here is significant, and it is worth addressing directly. The things that most need to be spoken aloud are exactly the things the mind has been keeping quiet for the best-sounding reasons. Too complicated to say simply. Not ready yet. I need to think about it more first. What would it even mean? All of those are the pattern. They are the anticipation reflex applying itself to language, imagining the consequence of speaking as a reason not to speak, even when you are speaking only to yourself, even when no consequence is remotely possible. The practice is one sentence. You do not have to know what comes after it. You do not have to have a plan. You simply have to say what is true, in your own voice, in the privacy of your own room, and let it be said. The third practice is what I will call choosing one interruption to not make. In the next 7 days, you will encounter at least one moment where you are about to stop yourself, where you are moving towards something true, a conversation, a decision, an action, a declaration, and the reflex to interrupt rises. The practice is to notice the reflex as it arises, to recognize it by its shape, the speed of it, the authority it claims, the way it presents anticipated obstacle as a full stop. To name it internally as the pattern, and then just once, just one single time, to continue forward anyway. This is not a practice of recklessness. It is not about abandoning discernment or ignoring genuine risk. It is about the specific and targeted interruption, the one that comes not from real obstacle, but from anticipated obstacle, from the wall that was built for weather that is no longer present. You will recognize it when it comes, because it will feel exactly like the familiar stopping, the one you know from decades of practice. And the invitation is to feel that sensation, to see it for what it is, the pattern, not the truth, and to take one step that the reflex was trying to prevent. The resistance to this practice is powerful. It will feel like risk, like exposure, like the thing you were afraid of might actually happen this time. What the Cazimi in Aries is showing you is that in most of the cases where this reflex fires, the anticipated consequence was never as large as the reflex presented it. The practice gives you a data point, one instance of not interrupting, one moment of continuing where you would have stopped. That single data point will tell you more about the real size of the obstacle than years of analyzing the pattern from a safe distance. You stayed. Through all of it, through the weight of the opening, through the long and precise naming of what you have been carrying, through the hard look at the pattern and the real naming of the in-between, you stayed. That is not a small thing. Sitting with depth, in a world that asks you to skim and scroll and move fast and stay on the surface, is a choice. It requires something from you, and it gives something back, something that the surface cannot offer. We began in the hours before the Cazimi, in the wait that arrives before something clarifies, in the specific quality of not yet knowing that precedes genuine insight. We end on the other side of it, not with answers, not with resolution, with a cleaner lens, with something that was underneath the noise, now slightly more audible, with one thing, maybe just one, seen more clearly than it was an hour ago. That is the Cazimi, doing exactly what it does. That is Mercury in the heart of the sun in Aries, direct, clean, brief, honest in a way that nothing else in the sky quite manages to be. Who you are right now, in this moment, having heard yourself named and having stayed for the full length of it, is someone who chose depth over distraction. That choice is not passive, it is not the default. In the daily texture of most lives, depth is the harder option, the one that takes longer and delivers its return more slowly and demands more of the person engaging with it. You made that choice tonight. And that is worth acknowledging. Not as a compliment, not as performance, but as a simple statement of what is true about the person watching these closing words. What you have been carrying in these weeks before the Cazimi was not, as it may have sometimes felt, evidence of something being wrong with you. It was evidence of something being active in you, a mind preparing for clarity, a self doing the underground work that precedes genuine recognition. The wait was the work, and the work was not wasted. You already know more than you have been acting on. You have known it for longer than you are comfortable admitting. The clarity you have been reaching for has not been absent. It has been waiting. Waiting for the noise to clear enough to hear it. Waiting for the lens to align. Tonight and tomorrow, in the window of this Cazimi, it is closer to the surface than it has been in a year. Not because the sky gave you something new, because the sky created conditions in which what was always there could finally be heard. Leave a comment at the end of this that says, "I heard it clearly," if you did. If even one thing tonight cut through and landed where things rarely land, because clarity of this quality deserves to be named out loud. It deserves a witness, even a brief one, even in a comment section at the bottom of a video watched alone in a quiet room. Say it. Like this if it reached you. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of depth. This is the work. This, staying still long enough to hear something true. This is what the work actually looks like. Go into these days with the lens clean. Let yourself see what you see. Do not rush to interpret it, to file it, to make it useful before you have simply let it be true. The truth does not need your management. It needs your willingness to let it exist without immediately turning it into a plan. In Aries, the first word of the zodiac, the word before all the other words, the sound the self makes before it has learned to qualify itself, there is only one instruction. Begin.